Welcome. This pitch is with Ronan Levy from Field Trip Health. Field Trip Health is a publicly traded company focused on the end-to-end development and delivery of psychedelic therapies. Ronan, take it away.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me here. As Greg mentioned, our company name is Field Trip, and we are focused on the end-to-end delivery and development and delivery of psychedelic therapies. And what that really means is that we are focused both on building the clinical infrastructure to deliver psychedelic therapies, as well as developing new molecules and new products to develop new psychedelic therapies for the future as this industry evolves. And how that gets expressed through our business structure is that we have our Field Trip Discovery division, which is focused on two primary projects. The first is advancing clinical work on a new psychedelic molecule that we've tentatively named FT104, which I'll go into in more depth shortly, which we hope to be in phase 1 clinical trials by the end of this year, as well as doing advanced research on psilocybin production through the actual mushrooms themselves, as well as our Field Trip Health division, which is focused on building the clinical infrastructure. We are presently operating in Toronto, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Atlanta, and we will very shortly be opening in Houston and Amsterdam, and have a plan to expand our footprint to 75 locations over the next few years. Our team has been together for the last 7 years, where most of the founding team was involved in our last business, where we scaled the largest network of cannabis specialized medical clinics in Canada to 30 locations and sold that to Aurora Cannabis. So we have deep expertise in really trying to establish credentials and credibility in once stigmatized medical areas such as cannabis, as well as now psychedelics. And we're supported by an incredible cast of advisors and board members, including Dieter Weinand, former chairman and CEO of Bayer Pharmaceuticals, Dr. Mike Ehlers, who used to be the SVP of R&D at Biogen, and Tom Lee, who is the founder and former chairman of One Medical. So deep expertise and knowledge in all of the facets of our business operations. For brevity, I will skip the typical pitch where we talk about the importance of mental health treatments in this era of a mental health crisis that's being exacerbated by COVID, and speak more specifically to the work we are doing with FT104. So with FT104, our strategy was very simple. We see how psilocybin is going to be a significant game changer when it comes to the delivery of psychedelic therapies and mental health treatments in general. However, psilocybin has two key limitations from a therapeutic and business perspective. The biggest limitation from a therapeutic perspective is the long duration associated with psilocybin. You're typically looking at a 4 to 6 hour experience plus therapy on both sides means it's a full day in the clinic, which results in high costs and challenges in terms of clinical administration. The second big challenge with psilocybin as a treatment option, despite the incredible promise it shows, is that it really is a well-known, well-characterized molecule, which means in terms of IP, even though a number of companies are pursuing different paths to IP around it, the amount of protection you can get is just not as robust as you can get with a novel chemical entity. And so we set out to ask our questions, could we solve these limitations with psilocybin in a way that lets us develop a novel molecule, developing the IP around it and addressing the short-term time frame? And the answer came back quite simply as yes, we could. There is a known psychedelic molecule. The underlying molecule we haven't actually disclosed yet for strategy reasons, although it will come out towards the end of this year, that we could enhance. And through our enhancements through chemistry, we developed FT104, a new chemical entity. Where we are in terms of the development process with FT104 is that we've optimized the synthesis of the drug, the prodrug, which is the strategy we're using, because we took that underlying molecule and added some components to it to enhance the solubility, solving one of the big limitations with the underlying molecule, is supported by a moiety that is a natural product that cleaves immediately in the body. So what you have is the parent molecule, that original molecule, reformulating. So we can de-risk the whole experience with FT104 because we understand the subjective and objective experience around it because of all of the anecdotal evidence around the use of the particular underlying molecule. And by doing so, we've now developed this new molecule that has very similar profile in terms of its subjective experience as well as its binding constants, which you can see on the right hand of the slide here, it works almost exactly like psilocybin in the brain, but importantly, has a much shorter time frame. That with FT104, the washout period in the blood is usually in 2 to 3 hours. So instead of having a 4 to 6 hour experience, you're looking at a 2 to 3 hour experience, but with a subjective experience that's very similar to psilocybin. So when you look at it overall, what we have with FT104 is a next generation psychedelic molecule that is very similar to psilocybin in its pharmacological profile, and has excellent drug qualities. But because it's a new chemical entity, what we have is robust patent protection. And as you can see here, we've applied for a patent for FT104 across a number of different claims, including novel composition of matter, formulation, and administration and methods of use. Right now, we're finishing ideally our preclinical work for FT104 by the end of this year, and we'll get into phase 1 clinical trials by the end of this year, with a view based on the strategy we've adopted and our preliminary choice of indication and population, where we think we can actually get to market within about a year of Compass Pathways psilocybin based on the timeframes that Compass Pathways has disclosed. And so what's fantastic about this is a lot of the hard work in terms of creating the regulatory pathways is going to be done by organizations like MAPS, like Compass Pathways, and then we'll be able to come through with a next generation molecule that we think, is as good as psilocybin in terms of efficacy, but better because of the reasons previously noted shortly thereafter. So we expect to be the first company out with a truly next generation psychedelic molecule in the market sometime in 2026. And so we think it's a great framework to be building this drug development strategy, which we will look to expand with new potential targets in the coming months as well. So we'll hopefully build out a robust pipeline of new chemical entities focused on the psychedelic molecule. On the other side of the equation, and this is really critical to understanding psychedelic therapies if people don't have a background on it, is that set and setting, the evidence shows, has a significant impact on the actual therapeutic outcome. So even if you have a great drug molecule, without the proper set, setting, and therapy surrounding the drug experience, there's an essential part of the overall therapeutic process that is really not being spoken to. And so as we developed our business model, both from a therapeutic perspective as well as a business perspective, we felt it was important to be focused on an integrated molecule where we're not only developing the novel molecules, but also developing the care and the centers that go around the psychedelic experience. And that's being executed through our Field Trip Health division. As mentioned previously, we're operating in Toronto, New York, LA, Chicago, and Atlanta, with new clinics opening in the coming month with a view to scaling to a footprint of 75 locations over the next few years. The results from our initial cohorts of patients where we're using ketamine-assisted therapy have been tremendous, both objectively as well as subjectively. And each clinic generates substantial cash flows of around 2 to 3 million in revenue per year, plus EBITDA of $600,000 to $1 million on a pro forma basis. So what we have within Field Trip is a deeply integrated model that enables us to build a footprint, to develop clinical studies, to deliver clinical care, to really generate a lot of information and understanding the therapeutic process within psychedelics that feeds into a drug development strategy, which we think is uniquely differentiated relative to everything out there, focused on new chemical entities derived from known psychedelic molecules that enable us to have a de-risk strategy overall, because we generally know the efficacy and safety of these molecules, but can develop robust IP around them. Just one final note before I sign off is that we recently completed a significant financing within Field Trip where we raised $95 million Canadian, which was the largest financing for a psychedelic company in Canada, in which some of the world's most recognized biotech investors participated quite heavily. Soleus Capital was a lead investor, but we also brought in funds like Avidity, Sphera, Pura Vida, and Jennison, well-known biotech investors who believe strongly in our drug development platform as well as our integrated model. So we're well capitalized to execute on our strategy, and we're focused on that very closely right now, building out new clinics and developing FT104 to be hopefully the first next generation psychedelic molecule to hit the markets. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ronan. That was great.
Thank you.
Why don't we start by talking about FT104? Could you share the types of indications you think you'll be able to address with the compound?
Yeah, so right now what we're providing is that we're going to be targeting mental health indications and depression more broadly. It may in fact be a subset of depression that we're focusing on, but that is still being analyzed and considered. Overall, we think are in a unique position to really thrive, because even if we focused on conditions like major depression or treatment resistant treatment resistant depression, sorry, through the clinical infrastructure that we're building, I think we'll have a unique opportunity to advance FT104 to be the first choice of treatment, even if other options are available within psychedelic therapies. But we may choose to focus on a smaller population, a less focused on indication as our first indication to go after, because it's the one that we're thinking about particularly right now or exploring quite heavily is an underserved population for which there are few treatment options. So there's an opportunity to carve out a niche that would enable us to, I think, have a lot more pricing flexibility with the treatment program. But that's still to be determined as we continue to move forward into phase 2 sometime, hopefully towards the end of next year is when we expect to be in phase 2.
Got it. And in terms of funding the development of FT104, long term, do you see yourselves funding it entirely yourself? Do you see, or with it through the public markets, or do you intend on partnering with pharma to fund those more expensive later stage trials?
We are deeply pragmatic people and business people, so we'll be constantly reevaluating that. I don't have a clear indication. With the $95 million financing that we just completed, we are fully capitalized to open up our 75 field trip health locations, as well as get FT104 through to the end of phase 2. So we have a lot of time and flexibility to consider the options before us. But at this point, all options are on the table, and we'll do what makes sense for field trip and our investors as we get closer to having to make some decisions around that.
Yep, cool. In terms of the field trip health, could you talk a bit about ketamine therapy and how you see patients, like what kind of indications patients are being treated with today, the process itself of ketamine therapy, and the kinds of outcomes that people can expect?
Absolutely. So within Field Trip, we lean quite heavily into the psychedelic experience just as a philosophical consideration. So while there are a number of ketamine infusion centers opening up across the US and Canada, we're really focused on providing ketamine-assisted therapy. So jurisdiction by jurisdiction, there are some limitations, but by and large, we prefer to deliver the ketamine through an intramuscular injection, which creates the highest bioavailability and immediacy of onset. So it is a very intense experience with a relatively low amount of drug overall, and have people lean deeply into the psychedelic experience, which we pair quite heavily with therapy. So a typical treatment program would involve 4 to 6 ketamine sessions, each of which is followed by an exploratory therapy session, and interspersed between each 2 ketamine-assisted therapy sessions would be integration therapy sessions that don't involve any drug whatsoever, really trying to take the insights and awareness that come out of the ketamine sessions and turn them into action. In terms of the people we're seeing so far, depression seems to be the primary indication that people are approaching us for, but we also are treating patients who are dealing with generalized anxiety disorder, PTSD, any number of conditions. What we really hope to achieve through our field trip health locations, in addition to obviously treating people and making people better now, is to really develop an objective scientific understanding of what set, setting, and therapy actually means and how it has an impact on the overall outcomes. Because we hear that being discussed quite significantly, that set and setting matter, but we don't actually know what it is about a given setting or the mindset or the preparation or the therapy that leads to the best outcomes. And so all of our field trip health locations have been developed with being data forward in mind, collecting as many data points. I didn't go into it in depth in our presentation, but we've developed a tool internally called Portal. We'll be collecting as many data points as we can, trying to triangulate and figure out what exactly the experience, what exactly of the experiential component of psychedelic therapies matters and leads to outcomes. And then we'll be taking that information and obviously using it to feed into our own drug development program as we look to establish the REMS and the delivery mechanisms and the surrounding therapies that go with FT104. It will obviously inform that. And then we'll have other opportunities to use what we're seeing within our clinics to inform future drug development strategies. So if we see a given population or a given need is not being served by ketamine or psilocybin or MDMA properly for any given reasons, we can then take that information and strategically turn it into a drug development strategy as well. So that's the thinking behind the integrated model, besides the revenue opportunities and all that kind of stuff. But I hope that answers that question. I know it was a little bit long-winded and I touched on a few things, but I think those were all important considerations.
No, I think it's good. Always good to hear explanations about the therapeutic, application itself. So that was helpful. In terms of your experience, having worked in cannabis now in psychedelic medicine, what learnings do you have from your cannabis days that you feel like you can apply today?
There are many, some more pragmatic, some more philosophical. Certainly on the pragmatic level, having scaled a large clinic network, even though cannabis medicine and psychedelic medicine are very different modalities in terms of the implementation, the back office operations that make clinics operate smoothly are the same. And so we have a lot of deep expertise in making clinics run very efficiently. And so certainly we're bringing that to the conversation here. On a philosophical level, what we saw in the cannabis industry is that we took a very medically focused approach to medical cannabis. There was the stereotypical notion of a Venice Beach doctor where you could pay $50 and get a recommendation as long as you could pay the $50. We focused on doing good medicine. We focused on assessing patients properly, determining whether cannabis was an appropriate therapeutic option for them, integrating the cannabis medicine into their overall care with their primary care physician or any specialist that may be overseeing it, and making it a real meaningful medical adjunct to their overall healthcare. And by focusing on doing it very professionally and medically, I think we were able to engender a lot, accelerate the buy-in from the medical community, which ultimately drove the buy-in from broader society and politicians as well. And I think that's creating an impact around the world right now. So we're bringing that lens to psychedelic medicines as well, which is we're focused on doing really good, really thoughtful medicine in a way that will resonate with the broader medical community, because the greatest way to create impact, the greatest way to create a sustainable business is to show that this is good medicine. And it's something that every doctor, primarily primary care physicians, but every doctor will be supportive of as making an adjunct to the overall therapy for their patients. And so those are the two key learnings that we're bringing into the psychedelic industry.
In terms of the sort of adoption of psychedelic medicine, how much adoption do you ultimately see when you think about like the broader population of having mental health issues? I think the number that gets thrown around a lot is 1 in 5 people in the course of their life, maybe 1 in 4. So I think about like psychedelic medicine as being one way to treat mental health, a really effective one. How do you think about the sort of population in terms of who the medicine is applicable to or for?
Yeah, I mean, my personal philosophy is that I believe that just about every person on the planet could benefit from conventional approaches to therapy, more or less to varying degrees. But I think everybody could benefit by having the opportunity to work with a therapist and develop some of the practices and habits that go along with an effective therapy regime. To the extent that psychedelic assisted therapies, as the name suggests, are really just catalyzing, increasing the efficacy of therapy, then I'm of the view that just about everybody on the planet could potentially benefit from psychedelic therapies. In fact, that's what gets me excited when I think about the future applications of psychedelics. It's not just in treating the mental health conditions, which is a significant and important unmet need right now, but it's also enabling people who may not necessarily meet the DSM requirements of having depression or anxiety to help them live more complete, happier, fuller lives with greater creativity, with greater empathy, all of the things that effective therapy can do I think effective psychedelic therapy can do just on a greatly accelerated basis, on a much more enjoyable basis, on a much more cost efficient basis. So I really do believe the potential applications are almost universal. Certainly there are some contraindications that would suggest that psychedelic assisted therapies are not appropriate, but by and large, I think that's a smaller population than the overall population that could potentially benefit from psychedelics.
Wonderful. All right. Any closing thoughts?
No, thank you for the opportunity. It's an incredible time. You know, what's really exciting about what's happening with psychedelics right now is how it's challenging many conventionally held notions about medicine, about mental health, about biotech. It doesn't fit nicely into any of these boxes. And so it's an incredible time to be involved in this industry and help develop this, because I think it can create really meaningful impact for millions, if not billions, of people and society at large. So it's great to be here. It's great to be part of the conversation, and I thank you for listening.
All right. Thanks, Ronan.